This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State weed scientist Jeremie Kouame begin today's show as they share reminders for grain sorghum planting when it comes to weeds, row spacing, seeding rate, planting date, and hybrid selection. Continuing the show is K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato as he provides another update from the winter wheat quality tour as he mentions the major concerns and yield estimate. Raymond Cloyd, K-State horticultural entomologist, ends the show discussing bagworms, brownheaded ash sawfly, rose sawfly, and clover mites. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking about considerations for planting grain sorghum. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State weed scientist Jeremie Kouame. Jeremie, Logan, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Thanks, Shelby.
So while we're thinking about planting grain sorghum, before we even get to putting grain sorghum in the ground, first wanting to consider some pre-planting herbicide options, Jeremie.
It's really important to think about pre-plant herbicide options because, again, it's really important for our growers to start really clean in the field. And in order to do that, we need some pre-plant herbicide programs. And so in grain sorghum, the ones we basically recommend are, first of all, atrazine is a very important herbicide, right? And then we also think about dicamba, and Clarity is a good option for growers. Using about 8 fluid ounces of Clarity is going to be a good option. And so on the label, it's recommended, though, to be, about 15 days before grain sorghum planting. And other options we have would include glyphosate, of course. Gramoxone, which is paraquat, is another option, but we need to be really careful with gramoxone because it's a restricted use herbicide. And to apply this, applicators need to be certified, and the training occurs at least every 3 years. So it's something to keep in mind. Other options that are available, though, we do have a group 14 herbicide that is called Reviton. So this is a good herbicide that provides a burn down activity for those weeds out there. We do have some 24C label on this one. And once applied at 1 fluid ounces per acre, we can plant grain sorghum 3 days later. But when we go to 2 fluid ounces per acre, we need to wait up to 7 days before planting grain sorghum. Sharpen is another option for pre-plant applications. And all these are good options. And sometimes in order to broaden the spectrum of weed control, we need to make some mixtures of those herbicides. But these are all good options for growers. When the weeds are already present in the field and we want to start clean, all these are good options to help.
What about some pre-emergence herbicides?
That's a great question. And we do also have some pre-emergence herbicide programs. So, of course, we have the group 15 herbicides. And those group 15 herbicides, we have Dual or S-metolachlor. We do have Outlook, and we do have Harness, which is acetochlor. But what is important to keep in mind, though, for the group 15 herbicides, to use those, we need to make sure that the seed are concept-free treated. Basically, this is a safener, which is going to help the crop, better tolerate those group 15 herbicides. But in addition to the group 15 herbicide, we do have other options there. Of course, atrazine is a key herbicide, right, which has a residual control. But we do have mesotrione, which is a good option, as well as sulfenacil, which is another option. And some premixes that have at least 2 modes of actions or 3 modes of actions are available for growers. So basically, we have a combination of S-metolachlor with atrazine, herbicides such as Bicep 2 or Degree Extra, Full-Time NXT are great options. And if growers don't want to use, atrazine in vermiculture, they also do have some options there. When we talk about verdict, which is a combination of sulfonylurea and dimethylamide, it's going to be an alternative in fields where, for example, growers are seeing a reduced, length of residual from atrazine, or if we do have, many weeds that have evolved resistance to atrazine, those options can be really important. And another combination would be, S-metolachlor with mesotrione, and those we do have Z-Max, we do have Coyote or Calibra. And then finally, the group, like the freeway mix options, we do have, of course, Lumax Easy, Lexar Easy, that have a combination of S-metolachlor, atrazine, and mesotrione. And so these are really interesting options that can help growers, for residual control.
As we're talking about weed control and grain sorghum planting, is it important to also factor in how row spacing can impact that?
Yeah, okay. So again, row spacing is a great thing. I think Logan is going to hit on this. But what's important to emphasize when it comes to weed control, though, so because we want to use as many, strategies as possible, right? And we want to make our crops as competitive with the weeds as possible. And so row spacing is one of the factors we preach about. So being able to use row spacing seeding rates in order to provide more competitiveness to our crops, it's going to be really, really important for, suppressing weeds and achieving, early canopy, which is really important.
What other factors should we consider when we think about row spacing then, Logan?
Yeah, so other considerations when we think about seeding rates and row spacing in grain sorghum, of course, these two things go hand in hand. We want to be making sure that we are pairing the right combination of seeding rate and row spacing to our environment. When we think about the seeding rate component of things, we really start from a low of about 30,000 seeds per acre on the very low end in our regions of far western Kansas, averaging less than 20 inches of rainfall in a year. As we get up above that threshold, we're looking at 35 to 64,000, 50,000 to 80,000 in that 26 to 32 inch rainfall zone, 70 to 125,000 seeds per acre, where we're up above 32 inches of annual rainfall. Some folks might even be pushing under irrigation up to that 150,000 seeds per acre range. Especially for our higher seeding rates, we might pair these with a narrower seeding rate in some environments. Typically, when we think about row spacing in grain sorghum, a standard row spacing would be 30 inches. Narrowing that down might be most often 15-inch row spacing is what we're thinking about for narrow, with some folks going as narrow as 7.5. Data from across Kansas has shown that in a lot of cases, we're either seeing similar yields with narrow rows, taking advantage of some of the weed management considerations that Jeremie mentioned. We're either maintaining similar yields on narrow rows, or in some areas, we might actually see a yield benefit by having more plants and more tillers into a smaller area, especially in those areas where our yield potential is a little bit higher.
What about when we're thinking about that planting day as it's time for people maybe to start getting in the field soon?
Yeah, so planting dates and hybrid maturity really go hand in hand. And there's also a seeding rate component that we can consider when we think about planting date as well. Planting dates for sorghum are really, really wide in Kansas. It's one of those crops that has one of the really wide range of potential dates. When we think about the state as a whole, we have kind of 4 zones that we separate the state into. Zone 1 being far northwest Kansas. Zone 2 covering portions of far southwest up through west central, north central, and northeast. Zone 3 going from south central through east central, and then our far southeast in Zone 4. In far northwest Kansas, we're going to be thinking about a planting date between May 15th and June 10th. Zone 2, that's that far southwest to far northeast band, going from May 15th to June 20th, a little bit longer zone than Zone 1. Zone 3, South Central to East Central, May 15th to June 20th. And then in far southeast Kansas, we've kind of got two potential recommended windows, with an early window from May 1st to May 15th, and then a second window from June 5th to June 25th. In all of these cases, we really want to be mindful about our combination of planting date and hybrid maturity, recognizing that if we are planting a hybrid that has a longer maturity, we really need to be careful about putting that crop out too late into the season, because although grain sorghum, we do need warmer soil temperatures, usually looking at 70-degree soil temperatures. We do need a warmer soil temperature than for typically for corn. We do have that long maturity into the tail end of the season when we run the risk of an early freeze during grain fill. So just really be mindful as you think about your combination of planting date and maturity, making sure that you've got a hybrid that is going to be able to take advantage of the growing season, but not potentially be cut short there towards the end with that risk of an early freeze, especially as you come from the northwest and down to southeast, from areas of high to low risk of freeze.
Logan, Jeremie, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Logan Simon and K-State weed specialist Jeremie Kouame. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Thursday show with another winter wheat quality tour update from K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato. Romulo, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Great to be here.
Romulo, where was this tour taking place yesterday?
So yesterday we left Colby. There were 6 routes again, right? And the westernmost route went all the way to Tribune and those counties neighboring Colorado and came south. The southernmost route went all the way to northwest and north central Oklahoma, right? And so all of those routes kind of came south and then took a turn east, finishing the day in Wichita. So they were fairly long routes yesterday, but seeing quite a bit of variability across the crop in that region as well. But that's pretty much the region that we cover, southwest and south central Kansas.
How many different stops did you guys have?
Oh, yesterday I believe there were 211 stops across all of the cars. So that's a lot of fields that folks out there were getting into and taking a look, try to understand what are the major concerns in each one of those fields, perhaps even a estimate of some of the yield potential that the crop has at this point. So yes, 211 stops.
And so from those 211 spots, what were those major concerns you were seeing?
So the themes that we were having yesterday, right, they were to some extent resembling the first day. If folks listened to us yesterday, you remember that the major theme was drought, right? And then there was a wheat streak mosaic concern. For the region that we visited yesterday, I would say that those flipped. So actually the major concern is wheat streak mosaic, right, for the region that we visited yesterday. So as we were leaving Colby and going south, there was still some level of drought concerns in that northwest portion of the state. But fairly quick there, by the time we got to Finney County, and especially Hodgman County, that area, just a lot of wheat streak mosaic virus. Many of the fields were bright yellow and boot height, right? And so it is a shame because that region has not seen a good yield potential in a few years now because of the drought. And now that we were setting up to have a very good crop, we actually turned out to have these late season infections of wheat streak mosaic virus that in some cases are just a late season infection, and probably the yield drops that are going to have might not be too high, right? Might be kind of conservative. If you're just seeing a few streaky leaves here and there, maybe some flag leaves impacted. But really, some of those fields got really stunted, bright yellow, sprawled out, and we went into a few of those. And it's a tough situation to see because the crop was, you could tell that the crop had a good potential and just got that infection with the virus there. But again, so with streak mosaics, definitely the biggest concern of the route of western Kansas, southwest Kansas, and going into south central Kansas. We were still seeing some drought symptoms, right? Especially we could tell some of those sandier soils around Pratt, St. John, and other regions. The crop really was seeing some signs of drought stress, even though they had some rain. Those soils don't hold a whole lot of water, right? So we could tell that the crop had been under drought stress already. Another thing that we saw more in south central Kansas really was some very scattered stands that are not very common for that part of the state, right? Mostly south central folks, they do a pretty good job on getting crop emerged and so on. They have moisture, right? What happened last year was, if we remember, right, we were fairly dry in October. Everything got planted. And then in parts of south central Kansas, they got like 7 or 8 inches at once. So that created some crust in the soils, that created some waterlogging, that created some, and that waterlogging may have killed the plants in part of the field. So the stands were less than ideal in south central Kansas, and that was really, we could really tell that. Another thing that we were seeing kind of across the entire road was white heads showing up in wheat, and that's fairly common for this time of the year, right? Just to have white heads showing up out there. There can be many different reasons for those white heads. Some of the common ones that we were seeing yesterday were some level of freeze damage. Nothing widespread, nothing too concerned. In years past, we have had much larger concerns of freeze damage than this year. But we're also seeing some root rots out there, and with stem maggot as well. Now, not only white heads, we're seeing some black heads there too. Loose smut was fairly common in a few of the fields in that south central part of the state. You know, as a reminder, that can take a huge hit because that's a head that was supposed to be there and it's not, right? So for our growers, that's fairly easy to correct. Is if you're saving seed, you know, at least clean it and use a fungicide seed treatment. You're going to take care of that. But if you don't, it's going to keep increasing year after year if you're saving that seed. And then I think another just maybe major thing that we saw yesterday was that there was some big differences between cropping systems as well. Wheat that was grown after fallow was looking probably 15, 20 bushels per acre better than wheat that was being grown continuously. So big difference there in yield potential as function of the cropping system that we have. Again, wheat planted continuously after a summer crop, right, back to back to the summer crop. Really felt that drought much more than a wheat that went into, well, it could be even a short summer fallow period in south central Kansas or a long fallow period in the western part of the state. So I believe that those were major concerns that we saw yesterday, Shelby. We, of course, saw many fields that had rye in them, especially in the south central part of the state, right, as we're getting to that Pratt region, more or less, right? We're starting to see quite a few fields having rye in them. But it was also nice to see that growers are tackling that. I think that I've seen more fields where you could tell that the rye had been sprayed, and that probably tells me that was likely a coaxium or a clear field variety out there. So all in all, for the region that we did yesterday, the potential was better than in probably the last 3 years or so. Again, because we didn't have such severe drought stress as we had as in the past 3 years in the southwest corner of the state. But many issues out there. But again, probably the biggest highlight with streak mosaic virus.
What are those yield estimates you've had from the Winter Wheat Quality Tour?
So the yield estimates in the Wheat Quality Tour there, as of yesterday of the entire route, it came out at about 53 bushels per acre, right, as average of those 211 stops. You know, a few of those are probably quite a bit that's probably on the very high end of what that region can get this year if we do get some more rain and cooler temperatures. Can I get there? I think we can, but we definitely need some cooler temperatures and some moisture, right? And the forecast calls for that. Look at the forecast. I think that the entire state is supposed to receive 1 to 2 inches and temperatures to be in the 70s or so. But we all know weather forecasts have been wrong in the past. But again, if the weather forecast comes by, that will be really good for the potential of the crop. And perhaps we can get in that region to these 53 bushels per acre. If it doesn't, right, if it does turn out hot and dry, then it can go down really fast, especially because it will probably worsen the symptoms of the weed streak mosaic virus that we're seeing.
After the tour ends, will there be more accumulation of yield estimates from the people who've attended?
By noon today, there will be a few more. Now, the last day of the tour, which is Thursday now, usually we don't get too many stops. You know, we might add 30 or 40 stops total to the, let me think here, to the over 400 stops we have done already, right? So I wouldn't expect the yield to change much in terms of yield estimate. The first day was estimated at 50. I think that's a little bit on the high end. The first day of the tour, you know, northwest Kansas, it's not going to get there. We were doing too many fields that were on 2025. So I have some concerns with calling 50 for north central and northwest Kansas. I think that's a little bit too optimistic. Maybe 42, 41, 42 more realistic for that region. Overall, as a big region, big area, right? Of course, with many fields there on that 2025 range, you also need a few fields on the 50, 60 to make up for those. But yes, by noon today, we're going to have the final number released. And again, that final number is simply an average of everybody's guess on production. And each one might get their production estimate differently. Somebody might estimate a yield of 48 bushels per acre and average abandonment of 10%, and they're going to get to a given number, right? And someone can change those values a little bit, maybe a little bit lower area abandonment estimate, lower yields, and get to a different production estimate. So they average that all out and come up with a final number for the state of Kansas around noon today.
Where will people be able to find that number?
The number will come out. The Kansas Wheat Commission puts out a report. We put out an e-update on that as well. So definitely later today, be on the expectation for that e-update article coming out, summarizing what we have seen in the tour. And, of course, on Twitter, right? So we're free to follow us there at KSU Wheat, and that number should come out there as well.
Romulo, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Always great to be here.
That was K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato with another update from the Winter Wheat Quality Tour. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will place links where you can find those yield estimates. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. For this week's Lawn and Garden segment, K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd discusses bagworms, brownheaded ash sawfly, rose sawfly, and clover mites. Raymond, a little word about bagworms. What are we seeing so far in the early season?
Well, it's that time, Jeff. We are now in the middle of May, and between now and June is when we should be expecting bagworms. First of all, if you know you have a history of bagworms on arborvitae, then you want to look at those trees for those small bags, 1/8 of an inch. They'll start getting to 1/4 of an inch. So be on the lookout, especially if they're ballooning in from certain areas. And then if you do see the bags with the caterpillar inside, and they're about 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, you can apply an insecticide. And the two that we recommend, the active ingredients, are number 1 is spinosad, and number 2 is BTK. And that stands for Bacillus thuringiensis karostaki. It's a bacteria that only kills caterpillars. Now, both those have to be consumed by the bagworm caterpillar. So that's why you apply it early on. Once they start getting larger, like if we meet next month, then you have to do something a little more hard on them, but also it's going to be toxic to some of the pollinators and beneficial insects. Both BTK and spinosad are probably the least harmful that you can apply for bagworms for pollinators and beneficial insects. Yeah.
And something we, like you say, want to catch early.
Exactly, because if you get them when they're young, they don't have to eat as much of these active ingredients to be killed.
Also, brown-headed ash sawfly, what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, this is an insect that showed up about 2016 on the 4th Street in Manhattan. It primarily feeds on green and white ash, and it's come back. This is the first time I've seen it since 2016. They look like caterpillars, but they're not. They're sawflies. They're actually Hymenoptera, not Lepidoptera. The larvae are light green with the white stripes down their body. They'll initially cause shot holes on the ash leaves, and they'll eventually eat them all. And they congregate at the base in large numbers. We've gotten a number of inquiries, and I just finished an article for our newsletter, blog. There is an extension publication you can obtain from your county or download it on brownheaded ash sawfly. Has everything you want to know. But really, rain or any weather will knock them down, and it's going to be very short. But if your ash trees are suffering substantial damage where you're compromising aesthetic value, you can use a high-pressure water spray to dislodge them or hand pick them off, or if you need to apply an insecticide, you can do that. If you have any questions, you can always call your extension agent or call Department of Entomology at Kansas State.
Rose sawfly may be a little bit more common, and we're seeing that too?
Yes, we are. The roses now are getting fed upon. If you go out and look at your roses and the veins are still there, they're kind of skeletonized, on the leaf underside will be a slug-looking insect, light green, orange-head, rose sawfly. That's another of those sawflies related to brown-headed ash sawfly. So the BTK, which I mentioned for bagworms, will not work on either brown-headed ash sawfly or rose sawfly. You need to hand pick, high-pressure water spray to dislodge them, or one of the other insecticides that's labeled for sawfly larvae.
Yeah, and do they tend to come back year after year then?
Well, the rose sawfly has been an annual pest. I've seen it every year for a couple of years now. There are 3 different species out there, but the rose sawfly, or it's also called rose slug because they do resemble a slug, have been very common. And so I'm sure you've gone out there and your roses look like they've been skeletonized, fed upon. Yeah, that's going to be, and some if they're really fed upon where the point where there's not much green, then there's no point of even making an application of insecticide. It's going to be too late, yeah.
And then finally, clover mites.
We are still getting inquiries for clover mites. They're difficult to deal with. They come in the home, spring, fall. They don't bite you, but they leave a sting, and they are a nuisance. The key for clover mites is keep your turf grass away from the foundation of the house. They do feed on turf grass. They can be a pest, but you want to put like a barrier of rock or some type of mulch around your home to provide an inhospitable environment for them to cross. That doesn't mean they will not. You may still have to apply an insecticide or contract with a pest management professional to have them come out and spray around the perimeter of the house to keep the clover mites from entering.
That's K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd with information on bagworms, brown-headed ash sawfly, rose sawfly, and clover mites. In addition to extension publications, you can contact your local extension office for more information. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.